This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Amelia Hadfield, the Head of Politics at the University of Surrey. Welcome to the Guildford Dragon, Amelia.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be back.
And my colleague Hugh Coakley, who also works on the Guildford Dragon, as many readers will know. Hi, Hugh.
Hi there.
And we're going to discuss the forthcoming Surrey County Council election. And the first question I'm going to pose is, what do you think will decide voters? What will make up their minds on who to vote for? Are they going to be local issues or national issues? Amelia, what do you think?
It's a great question. It's bound to be, I think, a combination of both. Most local elections, I think, telescope uniquely community-based issues, but also carry quite a clear narrative of what's happening at the national level. And I do think, whereas the last ones had the sort of leitmotif of Brexit around them, this time it's bound to be affected by COVID, the worries surrounding the recovery, the way in which the community as a whole is sort of reviving itself, and the shape and look, if you like, of what Surrey broadly and specific areas like Guildford ought to look like. So healthcare and COVID recovery, I think, is absolutely bound to dominate. Beyond that, I think the very real worry of what slow growth, slow investment, fall off of jobs, fall off of skills and employment is going to look at in physical ways. What is the high street going to look like? What is the damage going to be done, and how sustained is that damage to key areas in the boroughs and districts around Surrey? So I think those councillors, those campaigning now, who are able to articulate what the problems are, and be in very real touch with the existential worries of many citizens across Surrey, are going to probably fare better at the elections. So a listening local ear with a very real understanding that some of those solutions are going to require national and local approaches.
Okay, and Hugh, you've followed around on the canvassing trail. You've followed around candidates in previous elections. What do you suspect will be at the top of voters' minds when they decide which party or individual to support?
Well, sadly, I don't think it will be local issues that will dominate. It's often people aren't very clear about what local councillors do at all, and so that leads them to make their decisions based on how the government are doing, or the hot issue of the day. I think the local plan is still a really hot topic in Guildford.
But of course, not a county council issue.
But nonetheless, I think that's likely to affect the way people in Guildford vote in the 10 Guildford divisions. I don't know whether that will affect the Conservatives badly, in so much as it was the Conservatives that pushed it through at the last minute to much protest, or even it might affect R4GV. R4GV said they'll do a lot. For all good reasons, no doubt. They had these QCs look at it, but they haven't actually been seen to do a lot on the local plan, and maybe that will reflect badly on them. I don't know other issues. It's climate change is high up on, well, fairly high up on the political agenda. Whether it will play into a local agenda, I don't know. Sadly, I suspect it won't, but it might be one of the many issues that are behind the sort of things that might sway people to or against the ruling party, both, you know, the Conservative ruling party in Surrey and in government.
Now, candidates have before reported that one of the top issues on the doorstep is potholes, and roads, of course, are a county council responsibility. So do you think that some voters, that is the deciding factor, one single issue? I mean, I guess for some there are single issues that drive the way they vote. Or do you think actually the reason we can't pin it down in particular this time, and it means that actually the whole election is very difficult to forecast? Amelia?
You're right that single issues can dominate in a local election, and I think what appeals to people is are those sorts of things that make their life easy or difficult, depending on what they are. I mean, we do tend to think of, you know, potholes as something that is actually, it's microscopic in a sense of what the genuine care is provided for by Guildford Borough Council, for example, in terms of being able to support just roadworthiness. But I think you put your finger on it a little bit before, Martin. It might be a combination of local issues, single issues at the local level, but I can't help but feel that these are going to be massively overlaid by the way in which the local voices and structures of government respond to the national decisions and choices taken with regards to COVID. So my sense is you might get a division between people favoring change at this point, in terms of what can be changed, what can be planned, what can be rebuilt and why, and those feeling that now is not necessarily the right time, that simply trying to keep our head above the water level with regards to the economy is what's needed. So a steady hand on the tiller. So you might get a bit of a bifurcation, if you like, between the status quo on the one side and others with a rather more radical series of suggestions. And I think Hugh's right. I think climate change is probably going to bear well into this. I think the idea of sustainability and being able to promote a green growth, a green sort of resuscitation, has taken root. I think it's been one of the characteristics of sort of post-COVID recovery, that there's never been a better time to make massive and radical changes and to be able to drive sustainability targets, if you like, and the sort of pro-green credentials that a place like Surrey can and really ought to have, seems very, very opportune. And again, councillors campaigning who are able to listen carefully and chime in with narratives like this, I think are going to wind up on top of the pile.
Okay, thank you. And Hugh, Amelia mentioned the management of the pandemic. I mean, at the moment, how do you read that? Do you think that the Conservatives will get some support because of the successful vaccination program, even though some questions are coming up now? Or do you think that people will remember the earlier periods of the pandemic when things didn't seem so well in control?
I was talking to an ex-Conservative councillor who was really confident that the timing of these elections would be perfect for them, as there would be a huge a vaccine.
Conservative councillor, did you say?
An ex-Conservative councillor, and they were hugely confident that there would be a vaccine bounce. But and that may be the case. There is a people are feeling a little bit more chipper now, but I think the vaccine bounce, it's on the down. I don't think the vaccine bounce is there anymore. I think people are accepting that they've got a vaccine, and they're more now thinking back to, Boris Johnson and his moonshot and world beating this and world beating that, and comparing us with other countries. So I'm not convinced that the vaccine is going to do well for the Conservatives.
Okay, so we've looked at the issues now, and let's look at the actual voting system. It's an old chestnut, but it is actually important, and it could be particularly important this time, I think, because we've got more parties standing. So, Amelia, what's your view on that? How will first past the post affect the situation, given that we have 3 or 4 parties in many of the divisions?
Well, it does tend to reinforce the geographical predominance or preponderance, if I think to use the correct word, which in Surrey generally favours the Conservatives. But I think we need to remember, actually, and hark back to what happened in the previous election. And that's, of course, a very real sort of dirt. The Conservatives across the country lost control of 44 councils. And more than 1,300 council seats. And that was the worst Conservative local election performance since 1995. And Labour, despite topping national polls, actually lost 6 councils and more than 80 seats. It was very much parties who are, independently streamed or affiliated who supported remaining in the European Union that performed well. Now, we don't have, the Brexit camp anymore. That has been replaced by the large overarching, very real problems with regards to COVID management, the perception of how well the government as the Conservative Party has managed that. and is now going to manage the series, if you like, of anti-lockdowns beginning to allow us to sort of attain a degree of normalcy. So I think two things are happening. It's how do we sort of get back to what the sort of pre-COVID idea of what constitutes normality, and which of the parties sort of best represents that, and also what can and ought to very genuinely be changed beyond that. There may be things we cannot afford to go back to. And parties, I think, who articulate perhaps either like the Greens or the Independents or the Liberal Democrats, or possibly to some extent Labour, a different view, a different vision, may likely pick up seats, with surprisingly large percentages. It very much depends, I think, on what they what they decide to nail their colours to, which particular mast. In that perspective, I think we need to also remember the very significant increase in places like Waverley in the number of independents and local party councillors, who, again, the last time round saw the number of their seats more than doubling at the same time. So you can get, very, very real, very radical shifts on issues you would expect, but not in ways you would imagine.
Okay, and Hugh, it seems to be the case that in local elections, people find it easier to cast a protest vote because they feel it won't have the same consequences during a general election. So do you think that could play out, or do you think the gravity towards the traditional parties, which has been, we've been told so many times in my lifetime that we've broken away from it, only to find ourselves drifting back to it? Which one do you think will dominate?
Well, in Surrey County Council, you've got 81 seats and 61 of them are Conservatives. So the Conservatives have got a huge majority, and so many of those seats, looking at the results of the 2017 results this morning, so many of them seats are very, very comfortable. But having said that, so I don't expect a seismic change, but having said that, I didn't think there was going to be a seismic change in Guildford Borough, and their R4GV and Liberty, sort of swept in, and R4 and Lib Dems increased their number of seats. So it could happen, and I do think there is a number of, I think there is a movement for the residents and move away from local parties. You've seen, you do see, I think 9 of the seats in Surrey County Council are already in residents' hands. So it could happen, it really could happen. We do have 3 interesting seats in Guildford. Well, they're all interesting, but for instance, you've got in Guildford East, Graham Elwood is standing down, and he only had a 10% margin over the Lib Dem, George Potter, who is standing again. So that's a one to watch, I think. And then you've got Mark Brett Warburton in Guildford South East, who again, I think he's got a 10 or 11% margin against the next, I think, a Lib Dem. So that's another one. They're quite close. But the
and R4 are hoping. I've got hopes there, I believe, in Guildford South East. And
of course, you've got Shalford. You've got Matt Furness with a huge majority. Then you've got the very sparky John Redpath standing against him. So that's
for R4.
For R4GV. So that definitely should be worth watching.
Okay. It's
going to be an interesting election.
Okay. Now, I'm going to make you the joint czars of democracy in Surrey for the remainder of this debate. And I want you to tell me how we could get the turnout above the traditional level, which since 1980 has been between 30 and 45%. And given the pandemic, it could struggle even to get to that level this time. So what would you do to encourage people to turn out and vote? Amelia.
That's a tough one. I think in some sense, perhaps COVID is physically, sort of a dampener. So I would certainly, encourage either proxy voting or postal voting. Actually, and fair play to them. The majority of councillors, I think, have been pushing on this. Certainly, the leaflets that I've had through the door have made it very, very clear that there is a democratic imperative, upon everyone locally to vote however they want to, and if they haven't been vaccinated yet, to find a way. As Hugh said, I think the vast number of vaccinations resignations now that have occurred across the country, and of course across Surrey, I think will lessen people's physical anxieties about being able to vote in person. But there does tend to be a sort of degree of apathy that accompanies local elections, and it's that sort of apathy that we need to get past. So certainly media coverage like the Guildford Dragon News, making sure that it runs stories not just on why it's important to vote, but the very real impacts that voting can have in being able to change and contribute to and augment planning and a whole host of policies, many of which we don't necessarily understand. And again, I think that the other one is to remind people of the welterweight of policies that are available at local level. Obviously, the direction of travel, for the most part, is set at the strategic level of by our national government, but the actual implementation of that is somewhere between a half and 2/3 of that is undertaken by our tier system at the county level, the district level, and the borough level. And really important things like planning obviously rest with people that you choose to vote in as your councillors. So I think it's really important that we remind people of just how much power, in a sense, not just rests in their hands, but the ability to make sure that the right people are making decisions for the health of the county now and in the future. So it's a vote for today, but it's very much sustainable change for the future.
Okay,
something like planning, Amelia, even though there is a strong local part of it, it's dictated from the centre. If in Guildford, we've seen several applications that have been refused by the council that have gone through on appeal by the planning inspector. I think people do feel emasculated. They feel disenfranchised. Their vote won't make a difference with such a centralized.
Well, how about something much more? How about something much more radical, I mean, I've given you the powers of czars here, and so how about we make local taxation controlled locally, i.e. that actually it is the county council and the borough council that collects tax and spends it locally. They may give a donation for redistribution elsewhere, but wouldn't that really focus people's minds if they thought that the tax was being raised and spent locally?
Well, anything that decentralized our country would be a move towards increasing voting locally. I'm sure that's the case. For instance, and another thing is, we've talked about proportional representation. I think proportional representation would mean that people would see that their vote was counted. At the moment, if you're in the majority of Surrey, if you don't vote Conservative, your vote is effectively, well, you might consider it wasted.
Okay, now Amelia, you've obviously studied politics and across the world. So how does England and the UK compare with other countries when it comes to the power of local governments? Because I know from my travels to other parts of Europe and certainly to North America, where you come from, the local governments there, or the state or province governments, they have a lot more power.
Yeah, that's true. I think in any federal system, it's massively decentralized, apart from a few particular areas. So Canada, where I'm from, obviously it's divided into provinces and territories, and the provinces, for the most part, hold sway over absolutely everything. So there's provincial control. But it's funny how a province can sort of reassert a center. So if I'm from a city that's not the capital of the province, and we therefore have massive ding-dongs between ourselves and them, because they're associated with basically centralism, even though it's massively decentralized from Ottawa, the capital. But provinces generally are able to listen better because of the unique needs. I'm from the East Coast, so the maritime provinces are hugely different than the larger Ontarios and Quebecs in the middle. They're separate again from the needs of the prairie provinces, and that's a wholly different kettle of fish from the West Coast and from the Northern Territories. So in a country the size of Canada, or even the United States, it probably makes much more sense to devolve a whole series of powers and authority and logical decision making at that stage. In England, it is and has been for many, many years much more centralized. But that doesn't mean to say that local governments aren't without power or aren't without authority. And I understand that the first past the post might be might feel a little bit sort of top heavy in sort of amassing the sum total of votes of the preponderant party. But that doesn't mean you oughtn't vote. And I think the ability of many more parties that have fed into the political spectrum in England here in the last 20 years is incredibly encouraging for the overall health of democracy. The very fact that you've got so many independents and the rise of parties that used to be on the fringe, like the Green Party. Now the Green Party, I think, has probably the moral high ground in almost every aspect. So although it's centralized in many, many ways, let's not also forget, just a quick one in here, there was a white paper on devolution, not just for the home nations, actually, but for county councils, local, district and borough. That's something I'm very, very much in favor of, because I think a redistribution of that authority will probably be very healthy.
Okay, well, Amelia, Hugh, thank you very much. We've only managed to scratch the surface, of course. There are huge issues such as unitary authorities we haven't even mentioned. But I'm reminded that the county council budget is nearly £1 billion. So if you just look at it in money terms, it is an important election. And we do intend to, now we have scratched the surface, to dig further into these issues with our coverage on the Guildford Dragon. Thank you both very much.
Thank you,
Brendan.